participation at this meeting. Tammy Medically is our president. I'm going to have her do the introductions.
Okay, thank you, Rick. Yes, thanks to everybody for being here. Hi, Tam, I didn't get around to say hi to you. We are thrilled that we have this many people wanting to participate. To tell you the truth, when the names started coming in, we have a nice plethora, I guess you would say, of all people all over the community with all different types of jobs, from the north end to the south end to the east end to midtown to the group just came together really nicely. And so, yes, this is a large committee. And you know, you hear things about sometimes a committee can be too large, but I don't believe it can for what we have to discuss and the things that are going to be coming up about facilities. And I feel like the more input we get, the better it's going to be for our kids, for our district, and for our community as a whole. So if you asked to be on this committee, you were placed on this committee. So and we have a few people who are absent today. We're going to start today with just kind of an background information, some things that we feel that everyone needs to be on the same page with before we move into actually talking specifically about facilities. And then we'll take a hiatus for June and July because lots of vacations and that going on. And August 17th, we'll be back here and then probably meet monthly from then on. Maybe some months bi-monthly, depending on what the need is, okay? So I'm going to introduce Katie, and Katie works in our finance department, and she is going to take us through Budget 101 information. So Katie?
Thank you very much. As you said, my name is Katie Nye. We're going to go over your chief of business.
Katie, you're gonna, especially with your mask on in this room, you're gonna have to drop your mask or speak up or both.
Okay, everybody hear me now? Is that better? Okay. So this is our citizens guide. It's posted on our website under business office and budget information. We built it off of the this year was built off the 21 budget. So we put it together every August. That's why you see old board members' names on here. So we'll just start in the top left-hand corner for tax rate. So the tax rate has stayed relatively consistent since 2015. The total tax rate is made up of the operating tax rate and the debt service tax rate. And currently, the debt service is 50 cents and the operating is $3.8 dollars. So, do anybody have any questions about that? Okay.
And I would just add to that, if you notice from 2019 to 2020 where it started going up a little bit, 18 to 19, that was after the levy that we passed. So we would be flatlined, that's after the levy that we passed. And if we don't renew that levy that's coming up for renewal, we're gonna have a big drop off.
And that drops off in 23-24.
23-24, yeah.
So go down to the assessed valuation, which you can see has increased, but I calculated what it's increased from last year, and it's been less than 1%. And there was a question yesterday that somebody asked how much of residential and commercial makes up our assessed valuation. So 58.46% of our assessed valuation is residential, and 40.93% is commercial, and then less than 1% is agriculture.
Okay, can you repeat that again, please?
Yep, 58.46 is residential, 40.93% is commercial, and then less than 1% is agriculture.
Okay, you may just also want to touch base on the percentages of what are paid by that, because that's important for people to understand the amount that they pay out that assessed value.
And yeah, we were gonna kind of go into that on the calculate your tax
Well, then
bill.
I'll be quiet.
No, you're fine. I think it's the state that sets these percentages, but residential property is assessed at 19%, commercial is 32%, agriculture is 12%, and then personal property is 33 1/3%. So we'll just go over here to the tax bill. So we built this calculator in here, and I think it's really beneficial for our community members to see how to calculate what amount of taxes SJSD gets. So if your market value of your home is $100,000, you take that times the 19% assessed value that is set by the assessor's office or the state, and that gives you assessed market value of $19,000. You take that divided by 100, and then multiply that by our tax rate, which is what you see in the top left corner of that tax rate graph, and that tells tells you how much you pay to SJSD for your taxes.
So actually on the website, there's a calculator there?
It's not a functional, you can't plug it in.
Okay, you can't plug it in, okay.
That'd be a good idea, maybe I can talk to somebody about it.
What's the calculator for commercial property?
It would be the same, whatever your, I guess whatever your market value would be times 32% instead of 19.
Agricultural land is
12,
12%.
yep, and then personal property is 33 1/3. And then down on the bottom right, we have the top 5 taxpayers for the county. This is the top 5 taxpayers that have the highest assessed valuation. So we have East Hills Properties, Triumph Foods, Barringer Ingelheim, Fire, and Missouri American Water. Anybody have any questions on this page? So on the next page, we have how money is invested, which is how we put the money back into the schools. You can see the largest part is direct instruction, and that includes teacher salaries, classroom supplies, general education, or special education, I'm sorry, ESOL services, and then we go down to instructional support, and that includes like counseling and health services, occupational therapy, speech therapy, those types of things. And then support services makes up 17%, and that includes technology and our core data sector, which like manages our student information system, the business office, human resources, those type of things. And then 17% is facilities and maintenance, so that's maintenance salaries, any of their supplies, utilities are included in that, and then transportation makes up the last 4%. So that's our contract with that. And then under the budget summary, we broke it out with a little more detail so you can see what makes up that. As you can see, the largest part is 68.78% is salaries and benefits. So that's for every single person in the entire school district. Majority of the budget is and always will be salaries. For the operations section, which is professional services, those include like legal fees, auditing, and then instructional services that we have to contract with professional outside contractors. Transportation, the other purchase services includes like repairs and maintenance, any insurance and liabilities, memberships and dues. And then the other is just mainly our debt payments and the capital projects. Put up the major revenues in the top right. So a majority of our revenue is local, so that comes from our local taxes. Within the taxes, local area, it is sales of property, lunch revenue from students, and then you can see that the other largest portion is state. That's our state basic formula money. It also includes any state programs such as parents and teachers as well. Then we'll go down to the budget by funds. So that is just breaking it out between, we have 4 funds we are required to have by the state of Missouri. And there's a general description on the far right. We're going to go into more detail on that in a second. The largest, again, is special teachers, and that's where we have to pay our certified staff out of. And that is only for salaries. And then the other largest would be our general, which is where our non-certificated salaries are paid out of, and other classroom supplies and things like that. And then the very last little image at the bottom shows our student enrollment, which you can see has been dropping over the last few years. Anybody have any questions about this? Again, you can find this on the district website. If you can't find it, please email myself or Gabe or somebody else in our office, and we're more than happy to send it to you. And we will update it in August with the 2022 budget.
I think it was mentioned yesterday at the finance committee that in 2021, the enrollment's expected to drop another 200, or a little over 200 to about 10,500, if you're just wondering, to continue that as up to date as we can make it.
We will go on to
Before Katie goes on, the other thing, why that's important is for each student, it's $6,375. So you can see what happens every time you lose a student. And if you have hundreds of students that you start losing, that's money that you no longer are generating as a school district. You have to pay salary, pay for your student needs, classroom supplies. So enrollment is a big need within our financial.
fund, is where, like I said, all of our non-certificated salaries come out of, all of our transportation, all of our tax, revenue. Part of our tax revenue goes into Fund One. Classroom supplies come out of that. We do have a proprietary fund that we are able to place under Fund One, and that's where we keep our self-sustaining food service fund. Fund Two, again, can only be used for teachers. It has to be zeroed out at the end of the year, so we're not allowed to build a balance in that fund. The debt service fund is strictly what it is called. You can only use it to pay off your debt, which currently for the 22 school year will be $26 million. So any revenue that we get from taxes goes into that fund, and then we turn around and use that to pay down our principal and interest payments. And then the capital projects fund is used for roofing, any equipment that is over $1,000. So if a classroom needs to buy a stove for the fax and is over $1,000, that's where this comes out of this fund. We are allowed a transfer from Fund One to Fund Four. The max, I think, for this year is gonna be 5.2 million. It's calculated off of a, formula that I think takes your weighted average daily attendance times your total budget. It's a very complicated formula. And once we place the funds in there, we cannot take them back out. So once we make that maximum allowable transfer, we're not required to do maximum. We can do whatever amount we feel is necessary. But we cannot take it back out of there after we do that. Any questions about that?
So the big takeaway from this really is that this is not the same as your personal checkbook. Dollars can only go into certain funds, can only be spent on certain things. And sometimes when you put dollars in a location, you can't take them back out and transfer them to another location to be able to use for something else. So the largest bulk of our dollars is related to paying staff. And so I want to say we're about 70% of our budget goes to paying staff. And so that's why those first two funds are really the largest component of dollars. Debt service, as Katie mentioned, there is a part of our levy that is just for debt service, and that's what generates the revenue to pay off your past debt when you built schools in 14, we did something else, I want to say in 12, I forget the exact dates of those. That is what pays for those, that doesn't get paid for in any other way, to earn those debt service dollars.
And just one other little caveat is, the first two funds, your general and teachers, are make up your fund balance. So we included a little snapshot down at the bottom that is from our annual secretary board report that we are required to submit by August 15th to the state of Missouri. And it will show you the beginning funds, what we've spent expenditure-wise, revenue-wise for year to date, and then it calculates a ending fund balance of 23.61% from Fund 1 and 2, which is 23.61 is higher than what it was significantly from when I started, and I believe since Dr. Van Zyl and Dr. Edgar started, it's, I think it's 15%, and now we're at 23, which is very healthy. And then the restricted, just to explain that a little bit, there's a little restricted fund balance, and that is set aside for scholarships that we are a part of.
And so I would say, she mentioned that about the fund balance, when I came on the board, and prior to the 3 years that Dr. Van Zyl and Dr. Edgar have been here, we were right at 15%. At 14.5%, we can't make payroll. And so we're borrowing money in November to be able to make payroll in November and December, because most of our revenue doesn't come in until as you see on this breakdown, local revenue doesn't come in until after taxes are paid in December. So we bordered, not very healthy, but since Dr. Van Zyl and Dr. Edgar have been here, and Katie in the finance department have worked hard, all of our departments have worked to be more efficient under the leadership of the finance department and Dr. Van Zyl, and so now we're at a healthy 23.61%, which is good.
One of the questions we get asked, or go ahead, Ron, I'll be quiet, let somebody else ask it.
I'm curious about one of the questions we're asked, but for a while we had discussion regarding looking at our levy how does our levy compare to other school districts?
In Buchanan
The
County,
total levy?
I believe I didn't pull that information, but I believe the last time I looked at that, our St. Joseph's district was the lowest, if not one of the lowest, out of the school districts in Buchanan County. I can't tell you any exact amount, how much lower they are, but I know we were one of the lowest, if not the lowest.
We have LJ Hart, and that may be a good question. Larry Hart is their financial advisor. Larry, I don't know, can you hear me? How does our tax levy compare to other tax levies in Buchanan County or districts our size?
Well, your total tax levy, if you take the 15 largest enrollments of 11,000 or more students, you're 14th out of 15 in terms of total tax levy. So you're levying lower than most of the largest schools throughout the state.
And do you happen to know, like, compared to our surrounding districts, like Midwest, Savannah, those? I hate to put you on the spot, I know you weren't necessarily ready for that.
Well, the graphs I have handy are for the 15 largest schools. We can, Neil Branham is with me, he can probably go within a few minutes, come back with how you compare with the other districts in your county.
If I remember right when you pulled before, I want to say we were down at the bottom, even with those.
Yes, I think you are. I'll just I'll refresh my data on that in just a few moments.
Okay, thanks, Larry.
Doug, we're at the bottom in Buchanan County. I remember right, we're 60 cents per hundred lower than any other district in Buchanan County. We're one of 4 districts in Buchanan County.
However, we need to consider that the commercial property is a little
Yeah.
denser in St. Joseph proper than it is in the outlying agricultural areas.
We had pulled together something for Miss Witham that we compared North Andrew, Savannah, East Buchanan, Mid Buchanan, Buchanan County, St. Joseph, Stewartsville, and North Platte. And the only other school district of all of those that were lower than St. Joseph was Savannah.
So in essence, we're trying to operate a much larger school district on a lot less money than area school districts are getting for their smaller districts. So that's something to consider, especially when we start talking about a levy, tax levy and where it should be. Are you good?
That's all.
Anybody have questions for Katie over what? Now, I know this is a lot to take in, and that's why we printed it out, and we're gonna send it with you, so you can kind of look over it after today, but
Everything, north of I-70 and west of 65, the average total levy is $4.79. St. Joseph total levy is $4.34. So you're about 35 cents.
35 cents off.
About 35 cents below the average for every school in the northwest quadrant of the state.
Thank you, Larry.
We're looking, yep.
And I just have the question that pops into my head is, if we pass the levy and we gave you the extra 60 cents, what would be the first thing that would be your priority in our district?
Sorry. I heard what would be the priority.
What would be the priority in the district? What would be the very first thing you would do if we passed the levy, higher levy?
Well, I think you have to take a look at a couple of different things. Number one, I think you have to take a look at, are we able to attract and retain quality staff?
I was on that committee about 20 times, so
Yeah.
yeah, I have that.
And so, it's not always about dollars, but, you know, it doesn't hurt, when we know that other districts have some more dollars, and that's why the 61 cents that we passed a couple of years ago, by the time that's done, that all goes into staff. So that helps some. That's probably one of the first things. The other component is, also, I think for staff and students, is the environment that they are educated in. Because when you walk into some of our buildings on the second, third levels in August, September, October, May, and it's 85 degrees in the classroom, and you don't have outside air circulating through, so you're dealing with, of course, now with COVID and the pathogens that are in the air, because we don't have that. think that our facilities related to heating, cooling, comfort for our staff and students is another pretty big issue. That's my initial two throws out at you.
And I would say it's important to put out it so people understand, a lot of people interchange levy and bond when we're talking with the schools. And we need the air, but, and levy, it's important to keep in mind, those aren't necessarily interchangeable terms. Levy is what pays for programs, what pays for people.
Operations.
Pays operations, it pays your lights, that's the Fund 1, Fund 2. Bond is for your buildings, which I use, in telling people I always stick to the mnemonic device, they both start with B. Bonds are for buildings, so your levies for people. So, obviously, it's up to the board to put that out. This board member, Teresa, would tell you, if we got a sustainable, operating levy, money for teachers is, in our staff would be at the top of my list.
I think making that levy that we have now permanent
Would be.
instead of every 5 years, because it's difficult to plan beyond 2 years from now, what you're gonna be able to pay staff, especially.
And I didn't mean, my intention wasn't to steer us away from, what we were talking about the program, but sometimes when numbers are put in front of you, we lose the perspective. So I just wanted to, I think, bottom line, our levy is much lower than other districts, and we, whether we like it or not, we are in competition with other communities. We want to educate our students well, and it becomes a very big challenge to operate an entire system on a shoestring. Not that they don't do it, not that you all don't get it done, but it becomes a big challenge. And when we're trying to recruit our community, this is a factor. Are we investing in education?
And I think the other component to that is if you know you have a lower operating levy, you have to be as efficient as you can be in order to get the best out of the dollars that you have. So if you're not operating efficiently, that then takes away from the things that you're asking about. How do you pay teachers more if you are spreading the slice of pie over more people than you, because we have a finite amount of dollars that come in, and so to be able to have to be more efficient is one of the things that we're tasked to try to do.
And when we have to transfer funds from Fund 1, which pays for people, and put it into Fund 4 to pay for buildings, then that's money that's not there to pay our people. So that's where, to me, this committee comes in to say, how can we be efficient with our buildings so we can stop needing to make some of those adjustments to pay for roofs and to pay for downspouts and to pay for asphalt.
And when we talk about putting it into our people, yes, we're talking about salaries and benefits, but we're also talking about our students.
And for
That's the main focus of how much money are we losing putting into our students because we're not being efficient otherwise, so.
Special programming costs more. And, you know, we have special programming for lots of different interests, but when you're having to skimp on that side, it really affects your programs.
Okay, thank you,
Okay,
Katie.
any other questions for Katie?
Dr. Gonzalez?
Super. So we'll move down to the next one, about facilities and costs. So it's kind of a spreadsheet that's got multiple, things on yours is landscape, mine is corporate, so but it's the one with all the schools listed, addresses, utility costs, average insurance, all those things that are on there. So this was something we were asked to put together, by the board, to be able to share with people, to be able to say, people say, well, what does it cost to run your building? Here's what it costs to run our building. And when you talk about efficiencies, you can see that there are some inefficiencies, and I guess I would point out a couple of them. Number one, when you take a look at capacities, and you take a look at enrollment, and then you have that second to last column that shows you the number of facilities that are under capacity. That means you are underutilizing spaces, which is not the most efficient thing to do. And then you can also see that last column, that there is quite a discrepancy in some of our buildings as far as the cost that gets paid per student, and Katie, correct me if I'm wrong, but, those things are figured on the number of students, number of staff, and of course, if you have a more veteran staff in your building, that does impact, the cost. So don't give, if you got, teachers that are 15, 20, 30 years, and a bunch of those in your building, that's gonna be more of an average cost. But that's just something that we would have to monitor. The other thing that I think really makes things, as I said, inefficient is if you have a large facility that is being underutilized, your cost for that building is going to be more expensive as related to other facilities. So we just want to be able to get this out for people to be able to see, because we do get asked this quite often. You can see that there are utility costs built in, shows what our average costs are. Insurance is in there as well. And then preventative maintenance cost, we basically have the same amount of money set aside for each building, because you never know what's gonna happen. A roof goes out, sewer line goes out, air conditioning issues, the buildings that are air conditioned, so we try to balance that as best we can, and that's how Katie and Gabe built that part of the budget. Questions in regard to that? Yeah.
Going back to the cost per student, looking at the different buildings, I noticed our two newest buildings, Carden Park and Oak Grove.
Mhm.
The cost per student in those two buildings is to the lowest, not the lowest, well, Carden Park is, but two of the lower costs. Is that because we have younger teachers there? Have we looked at that, or are there other factors?
Well, some of it is you have a larger number of students in those facilities, so you're dividing some of those costs out. And I would say in the case of Carden Park, you probably have a younger staff.
I would say the utilities are probably cheaper because they're newer buildings.
And with a more efficient building, lighting, and those type of things, a little bit newer, even though we all know the heating and cooling in those buildings are now fixed, but weren't before, they do run more efficiently than other buildings related to that, so that's probably part of it.
So these newer buildings are run more efficiently.
If they're set up the right way, you know, if you put something in and they're not calibrated and set up to do what they're supposed to do, they don't always, and that was part of the reason, somebody was part of the finance committee yesterday, and Schneider Electric was there. There were 6 buildings that were really causing us issues, and Mickey can speak to that if he wants to, but those were the ones that they went in and found the heating, the cooling issues that created problems. We were replacing items that shouldn't have to be replaced because they were not set up the right way or undersized or created some other issues for us. But once they are set up, they normally will run more efficiently.
So just to clarify, this sheet does not include any instructional costs, it's strictly the cost per student for
It's only the
building
cost of
costs.
Okay,
Good question.
that's a good clarification.
Otherwise, you're making a lot of money if you're getting $6,300.
True. Yeah, good question. Thank you. Does that make sense? Because a lot of people normally ask us what it costs to operate a building, and this is basically it in a nutshell for you. The other component that I wanted to talk about was student enrollment data. Some of that is on the sheet that we were just looking at, so you can see building capacities and then the enrollment numbers or the membership in there. I also put a sheet on your table, and I apologize, I hit print, and it was supposed to be in color, but it came out in black and white, and I wasn't gonna print off another 40 copies in color and waste them, so I apologize if you have to squint a little bit for those. You'll notice the numbers are off just a little bit, and that's because when you take a look at 2021, I've got 10,404, that was our September membership count. And you can see when you go to the column that I just showed, or the spreadsheet we were just on, that's our January report, so we're actually down from September to now, almost 200 students from that. But what I wanted to do was show you over time, from 15, 16 to this year, what has happened to our enrollment. And these come from the reports we turn into the state, and so Holly got that updated for me today. So you can see in 15-16, we had, over 11,000 students. Next year was pretty close, the next year was down a little bit, next year was a pretty big drop. 19-20 was another big drop, this year is another big drop, so we're down about 876 students from 15 and 16. And if you remember, we did a demographic study in 19, that the trend is for us to continue to go down unless something changes drastically in the community. And he gave us high, medium, and low, and this is on the low end of the projection, meaning this is the worst of the projections that he picked out. So I would say it probably are a little impacted this year because of COVID, but I won't say that it is drastically different than what you see trending there. The other thing that I wanted to point out is, if it was in color, it was a lot prettier. But you can see what I also tried to show you is if you take a look at kindergarten class up there at 928 in 2015-16, then compare them to the first grade class in 16-17 of 898. Any place that has a color on it other than white means a class from 1 year to the next lost students. The darkest colored ones are over a 40 student loss per class. So you can see there are very few classes and very few years where we have classes staying the same or increasing, but we have quite a few classes that are from 1 year to the next a lower number of students. And people will probably ask, well, why? Great question. And I think there's multiple variables to that. You know, we got asked this question a little bit yesterday in regard to student population. And I don't know that there's a silver bullet to it. I think that people are more mobile nowadays. I think that people are willing to move to different locations if the amenities in the community are what they want. If they've got restaurants, doctors, if they're two-person family that both parents work. A lot of people will pick a midpoint, so not to have one person do all the extra driving, they kind of spread those things out, so I think those things happen. And I also think that some of the things that have happened in the past within our community have probably created some of the issues that we're seeing here as well. So this is something that we do try to take a look at. And if you see that with the 876 fewer students, that's almost $6 million less, $5.5 million less that we are receiving in regard to the amount of students that are coming in. So even though we increased our levy a couple years ago by 60